Ciao tutti, benvenuti a React Native Radio. This week we're talking to Lorenzo Sciandra, and we have on our panel Josh Justice.
Hey everyone.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. And so Lorenzo, do you want to give us just a quick rundown on what we're talking about here and what you talked about at Chain React and things like that?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. I've been a huge fan of the podcast for a long time, so it's great to be here.
Back when functional programming was making its resurgence, I found it really interesting that a lot of people were moving over there, and it almost felt like it was on hype, and I didn't really understand the power of functional programming until I learned Elixir. Elixir is a functional programming language. It's built on the Erlang virtual machine, and it really does some interesting things and makes you build apps in a different way. But what's really fascinating about it is the speed of the applications, the ability to distribute work easily, and just how it manages the functional programming and all of the nice things about it so that you don't have to worry about side effects and a lot of the other things that come out of functional programming. Plus, pattern matching in Elixir is a killer feature. If you're looking for a new language that you want to learn that is going to make a difference for you and give you the opportunity to challenge some of your thinking and find a new way of doing it, Elixir is a great way to go. And we have a podcast now on Elixir called Elixir Mix. And you can find that at elixirmix.com.
I was talking with Josh the other day and we were like, you know what, it would be nice to give everyone like a roundup around the RAC Native Community Organization, since it's been like part of the main effort of the Lean Core that has been undergoing for almost a year now. So I'm more than happy to be here to chat with you about that.
Yeah, so why don't you just kind of give us a summary quick if folks have not heard of React Native Community Organization or the Lean Core effort. What are those two things and how do they relate?
So basically the Lean Core effort, which when it started actually was called the Slimmening, is basically a process that we maintainers decided to try and use to get some components outside of the main RAC Native repo and basically give to each one of these components its own repository over in the RAC Native Community Organization so that a maintainer from the community could step up, own that component, and by doing so, basically remove the extra complexity of having to be intertwined with the main React Native release process, but it could be its own separate thing. And since the very beginning, which is probably like November last year when we did the first release of RAC Native WebView, now I think we are at around 25 Lean Core extracted components. And overall it's going great. It's been a huge challenge, to be honest, I think, for the community. Like they really had to get involved. Like we have a lot of awesome maintainers that decided to undergo this challenge.
Cool. And so was React Native Community Organization, did that predate the Lean Core effort or was it started around the same time?
Well, the React Native community has a bit of a complicated history, I think. Like I'm one of the owners right now and I don't know the full story of it, but basically it was created like in the very early days of React Native. So probably around 3 years ago, I would say. And it was always around like, for the longest time, it almost served the purpose of like, let's just give these repositories that no one wants to maintain anymore a new life, because by moving them into an organization, what you get is that the any person inside the organization can actually have authorization over it. So it makes life easier to, for example, reply to issues, or if you need to do like PRs or anything, you can always get someone else to help out with it. And then basically last year, through the discussion and proposal repository, we agreed that the RAC Native Community Organization was the best place to use for the Lean Core effort. And that also required to basically merge it with another organization, which was called React Community. And it was basically, it was called React Community, but it was again, basically a React Native organization. So it just made sense. And everyone involved actually was super on the same page. So we just decided to merge them together. And since then, basically the RAC Native Community as an organization was in 2.0.
Cool. You had you mentioned just the benefit of kind of sharing the load as far as maintaining these packages, how anyone in the organization can have access to do so. That was one of the points that really made the most sense to me from your talk at Chain React, was just the support that provides versus a single maintainer having a package that a lot of us in the React Native world rely on. And yet, if they need to take a break, if they get stressed out, if they are no longer using it in their own work, just having that safety net and that kind of support for one another as maintainers. Did you want to say anything else about that, just kind of the logistical support that the React Native community provides to maintainers that way?
Yeah, sure. Basically, as you mentioned, like it's great because it creates a safety net for everyone involved. At the same time, by being in it, you also get access to some of the dedicated repositories that we've created to help the maintainers. So, for example, there's a Circle CI orb that is there just to help you out. Satya, which is one of the maintainers that we have that is currently, I think, also one of the main maintainers for the RAC navigation library. He created a small CLI tool called Bob, which helps you create new libraries and making sure that the shape of it is good. And also, there are a few other advantages, like we have a dedicated Discord server where we communicate and try to, stay up to date. We have also created an NPM registry so that we can publish all the packages under the @RAC Native Community organization there. And also we have another, you see, there are a lot of things that you can do when you have an organization. And there's one more, which is the .GitHub Organization, which basically is a feature that GitHub enables you to have in an org, where you can basically have a set of files that gets propagated across all the repositories. And those elements altogether are trying to provide all the maintainers with a safety, and not only with just the safety net, but also with a support. Like if these other tools that we provide are there, you don't need to do those things manually, for example. And that's really important because most maintainers are actually doing this. Still, we're in the open source world. We're all doing it mostly on our spare time, on top of our daily job. So we are really trying hard to make sure that the role is sustainable, that it doesn't stress you out, that you do it when you're interested in doing it and it's not burning you out.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We actually started a show a few weeks ago about open source sustainability and maintainability called Sustain Our Software. And, we started it with the folks that put together the Sustain OSS conference last year. I think they're doing another one this year. And we've had conversations around a lot of this. And it's really interesting just how many of these maintainers that get in, they're enthusiastic. They're building stuff that we all use. It's stuff that we need. And eventually they don't feel appreciated. They feel overwhelmed. They get exhausted. They need more money to go pay for other things. And it gets to the point where it gets really hard. And so to feel like you have an organization behind you, to feel like you have support from the community, to feel like you've got some of these other things going for you, it makes a lot of difference, because then it's okay, well, if I have to backslide for a couple of weeks, my kid gets sick, or, I have a major upset in life, I can go deal with that and know that, my community and my users and my people that I really care about, that I'm doing this for, are going to be taken care of. And if I need, kind of a mental health break, right, because I'm just overwhelmed, I can go get it. And at the same time, I'm not getting as burned out because I know that people care.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I'm going to be in the other podcast in a couple of months, I think, something like that. So looking forward to that. But basically the overall idea is that, burnout in particular is something that is really on my top priorities, to avoid for other maintainers. And that's why even my chain react talk was all around these kind of issues, because while until now, like we've been basically talking about this community organization as if it was perfect, is actually not really at the level where it should be. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the core values. Like we're really trying to focus on making sure that all the maintainers can feel that at any point they are not overwhelmed. And it's hard, to be honest. It's a really complicated problem because as a developer and community, to be honest, we don't really get educated around like mental health issues or like taking care of our mental health. We still have a bit of the old school. The cool developer is the one that drinks coffee, stays awake between 12 and 2 a.m. or like stays awake the whole night and code the whole night and doesn't have any friend. But that kind of a mentality is really risky when it comes to then, applying it to your daily life, because you have a job and then you, on top of it, do open source and you feel like, well, of course I'm doing it on top of my daily job and of course I'm going to spend the night doing that. But little by little, you're going to burn yourself to the ground if you don't, start to, like looking at the red flags that you may actually experience, like the most classic one is like not even wanting to press, for example, the issue section of your repository. Like when you get to that point where like, I don't even want to do it, but I have to, then probably it's already almost at the edge. Like you should probably take a break, talk with someone. Like I feel that one of the major things to do is literally get someone to talk to. And that's also why we're trying to get all the maintainers on our private Discord, because we really want to give everyone a place where they can, as soon as they feel something, as soon as they want to talk with someone, there's the community where they can share it without having, to go on the public plaza of, for example, Twitter.
How have things been going for you lately, Lorenzo, with your own open source maintenance?
Well, actually, after my Chain React Conf talk, I actually had to take a break myself. And it wasn't even the first one I had to take, because basically lately I've become more aware than others probably around like my red flags. And the weeks before the conference, I really tried hard to polish my talk and still do the RAC Native Community job and do my daily job. And even if I work for an awesome company, which is like Formidable Labs, which is great, like we have an awesome level of support for each of us, is like crazy. I love everyone there. Even if I had that support, it was still like a lot of time that I had to work on things. And, you tend to get stressed out also because we were planning to do the React Native 60 release right before the Chain React event, and then they dropped Hermes during the event, and then it was like a lot of things happening at the same time, and I knew that was going to be like a convergence of things that I had to endure. But then as soon as I got home, also because I live in London, so for me, like going back from home was like 8-hour time zone difference. I was like, you know what, my body is stressed enough. Let's take a break. And I took like probably a couple weeks, 3 weeks. And I think it's one of the most important things, like take some breaks from open source, like disable notifications, remove Twitter from your phone, and like don't worry too much about like not reading notifications. Like that's another really good piece of information, I think, is like just mark them as read. And then if they're important, they will surface again.
I'm really glad you got to take that break and just kind of getting that self-awareness. I think, what you're saying reminds me of what Henry Zhu from Babel has been saying. And when he went full-time on that project, I think he reached the conclusion that the value that he could add was more to enable other maintainers of Babel, as well as to speak to these issues in open source in general. And so it could, as talented and experienced as you are with React Native itself, you may have gotten to the point where the value you can add is, helping others to do that, as well as helping others to protect themselves. So however much that does or doesn't continue to be a part of your focus, just thank you for investing in people in this way. It's really great.
Thank you. Super appreciate it.
About 10 months before we started Ruby Rogues, which is the oldest podcast on devchat.tv, I went freelance. And one of the things that I figured out pretty fast is that I had no idea what I was doing. And I made a bunch of mistakes, but I also made a bunch of friends who were doing freelance. And we got together and we started a podcast called The Freelancer Show. And The Freelancer Show has been running about as long as JavaScript Jabber. But we talked every week about all of the things that we were learning and doing in freelancing and giving people advice on how to get their business started so that they could go out and be independent if that's what they wanted. Nowadays, I'm not on the show anymore, but we have terrific people like Reuven Lerner and Eric Dietrich that come on every week and talk to you about how they run their businesses and give other perspectives on things that you can do. So whether it's how to find clients or whether it's how to step in and start doing training or other programs or how to run a business, they have a ton of experience and they talk about all kinds of things that are going to help you pull things together and be successful as a freelancer. So whether you're thinking about moonlighting and trying it out or whether you're going whole hog and quitting your job, you should definitely check out The Freelancer Show. And you can find that at freelancershow.com.
I'm a little curious, just along those lines. How much time do you spend, lifting up other maintainers versus doing open source code contributions yourself?
I would say probably right now, I'm mostly doing the supporting other maintainers because it's the thing that I feel I can provide most value in. Simply because I've been through I've experienced burnout myself, so I'm really sensible around that issue. And as one of the people that has been trying to, get more people involved in the community, I really feel like a sense of responsibility. Like I got you into the door, so now I want to make sure that you're having a good time, kind of thing. In terms of code, I had to scale it down, mostly because when I started, it was mostly issue triaging and trying to do fixes and commenting and trying to make people able to contribute back on their own. But that's kind of that wore me down a bit. And so right now, I feel that I had to scale it down. I really feel that I'm doing still releases. I'm helping Mike Grabowski, which is the other core maintainer not working for Facebook that is responsible for the releases, because literally that's one of the few things that only me, him, and the people from Facebook can do, literally from a write authorization to the repo perspective. So that's mostly my involvement. And usually on a week, right now I'm trying to do 4 or 5 hours overall in the week, mostly going around the Discord server, trying to get more people involved. Or right now there's a really interesting conversation happening and I'm not really allowed to say much about it, but one of the biggest issues around the RAC Native community is that most people are doing it in their free time and they're doing it out of their own will. And aside from a few examples, which are for example, the CLI, which is maintained by Callstack, the daytime picker, which is maintained by the guys from GoDaddy, we don't really have companies being involved. And that would be a really easy way to solve sustainability. So we're trying to get more companies more involved so that, when a company is involved in a more an official way, they can handle the human side, the human quote unquote resource that is working on it. So they can, scale it down or give this person proper monetary reward. For example, Formidable has an awesome program which is called SOS, which basically allows us to log our extra hours that we spend on open source, and they will pay us some money back. And I think it works well for us because we are already open source people, so we can balance that. We're not doing it for the money, but it's good to see that you have basically some sort of validation, basically, because it's not really much more than that. It's more we acknowledge that you've done some work, and sadly not many companies do that. But if we can get the companies that do that involved, then we will create a more sustainable community. And there are some cool and interesting conversations happening, but I'm not really allowed to say more than that. Sorry.
I feel in a sense, this open source support might be even more important than in React Native than on other platforms. Listeners and Chuck know I love to compare different frameworks and platforms. If you're building directly native, Apple and Google provide you with the basic building blocks you work with. If you're building on the web, the browser gives it to you, and you can build abstractions on top of it, but you have access to everything you need. But in a sense, on React Native and similar platforms, it's like to get access to native components, it's like it would not really be sustainable for everybody to build in those native connections over and over again on every app they work on. And it also does not make sense for Facebook to supply those connections for things they don't actively use. That's part of where Lean Core came from, was pulling these things out. And so I think to supply us with the kind of React Native experience that really, gives the platform, realizes its potential, I think there's a need for this open source support. And so I think that investment especially pays off in this community.
Yeah, 100%. We're seeing like other communities that comes from like the cross-platform world, like sort of hitting these issues right now where like, hey, I have to rely on third-party platforms that are maintained by some guy in his spare time. And I'm like, yeah, join the crew. Like it's been like this for 3-4 years now in React Native world. But yeah, basically it's still a problem that we're trying to solve. It's not something that we have a final solution. We're trying to invest in, like my time, for example, I'm trying to invest my time mostly in ways, like in trying to find ways to solve this problem. And you can also like sort of keep an eye on the .github organization, on the .github repository, because there's an issue which is like literally dedicated to the sustainability issue, where we try to, keep it transparent. Like this repository, aside from the feature which I described earlier, we're trying to use it in its issue section as sort of like a discussion and proposal for the maintainers of the organization. So we're trying to keep it transparent. So if any of the listeners wants to, hey, I think I have a better idea on how to do this, there's an issue, it's dedicated, it's pinned at the top, I think, the sustainability in the organization one. So it would be great to get some more people opinions and ideas in there.
Yeah, I also want to just pile on to what Josh was saying for a minute. In the native world, you definitely you work in one stack that's kind of built up by one company. And on the web, it's kind of the same thing. There are standards and everybody kind of builds on them. Yeah, you're in a position where you're creating a community around a technology that is deliberately meant to deploy to different devices with different specs, and you just can't count on. I mean, there's some things you can count on, but a lot of things you can't. And so it's interesting to see, okay, how do we deal with these issues? How do we deal with these issues as, we move into Android, and then, maybe eventually things get added in so you run on other phone devices, or, maybe you can build desktop apps or things like that. And so there are a lot of ways that it gets really interesting really quickly. And so you're bringing in a wide variety of expertise that can really deeply impact the way that people build apps. And so, yeah, it's interesting to me to just see how you're getting everybody kind of in the same swim lane and seeing if you can create a little bit of a current there for people to follow.
Yeah, I think that like RAC Native 60 has been a bit of a test of strength for this new, format for the community, this new group of people, because in particular for the Android side, precisely because what you were mentioning, when it's Google maintaining Android, they don't really care about, supporting iOS, or on the other way, like Apple doesn't really care about supporting things on Android. So you always end up having to get someone which is really experienced in one of the platforms to help you out. And I want to give in particular a shout out to Mike Hardy. Is one of the I'm so happy that he's around in the RAC Native community right now, because he created an awesome tool called Jetifier that basically auto-fixed all your Android dependencies when you upgrade it to RAC Native 60, so that you don't have to feel the pain of Android X. But yeah, it's a lot of work, and gladly, even if people sort of stop for any reason, to be honest, I've heard so many people saying things like, I've stopped being a RAC Native RAC Native developer, or I've changed jobs, so it's not in my best interest anymore to keep helping with this. It's the great part about this community is that we always get more people involved. And so even if someone leaves, there's someone that can step in and try to help out. And Yeah, it's really complicated, to be honest.
To take things a little bit lighter, I have a much more superficial question about a certain React Native Community project, the ESLint config. So I'm a recent convert to Prettier, and I am obsessed with it. And it seemed like, I think if I'm remembering correctly, the ESLint config just recently rolled out in 60 or so. So it's cool to have a community standardized on a code style. If you know anything about it, tell us about how that came about, who was involved, and how you did the bike shedding to pick all the settings.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that I liked the most when we started talking about it, is because having a common ESLint configuration would help like all the code bases to be more consistent, and consistency is something that I really love. I think that the backstory, to be honest, is kind of easy. Like we didn't have to do any, conversation about, which rules are we going to pick? Because basically it's just a re-export of the internal Facebook ESLint configuration. So that's the other great thing, to be honest, because since it's that configuration, we're working with the same quote unquote standards that Facebook uses in its own production software. And by doing so, also we're keeping it inside the main repository now. We're publishing under the RAC Native Community NPM organization. I think that currently we're at version like 0.05 or something. And probably there's a new version that will come out at some point, because I've seen a couple of issues saying like, hey, when is the new version coming out? Because apparently there's been some changes. But yeah, overall, I think it's great. We're still trying to get everyone in the RAC Native Community Organization to jump aboard and configure their code base against it. But yeah, it's great to have there and have it as a standard and be like, you know what, every React Native project should use this, because it's what Facebook uses, it's what the React Native community uses. So it's good. Like for me, consistency is key.
We talked so much about your open source work. Is there anything you can say about your day-to-day work, the formidable projects you're working on, or even just in general, like what kind of things you're getting to do day-to-day?
Well, day-to-day, I do RAC Native, surprisingly. No, sadly, I can't really tell the company I'm working with. Of course, Formidable is a consultancy. We have our office here in London, which is growing, and it's a really interesting project because it's a React Native project which is going to live inside a monorepo, which until now has been basically only used for web, for a really, really big production web app, basically. So it has a couple of interesting challenges, and to be honest, it's kind of fascinating to see like how big corporates work, because I come from a startup background. Like when I moved to London, I always worked for startups, and they have like this agile mentality, and they have all these, whatever, let's try to do something, and if it doesn't work, we can just rebuild it next month. And when you're in a more corporate environment, instead, you have more fixed rules. You need to pay attention to certain things. The dynamics are different between people, but it's fascinating. Like I love trying new things, and for sure, working on this project is one of them.
Nice. I will give a plug to Formidable Labs. I got to speak at Chain React to someone else. Do you remember who it was on Formidable's leadership that I was chatting with at that restaurant?
It was Per, I guess, because yes. He's like the VP of all the offices. It's like one of our top people, and he's a lovely guy.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I just got to ask him a bunch of questions about how the company works and how you handle various things that come up and how you're structured and things like that. Because we're thinking about similar things where I work at Big Nerd Ranch. And it really struck me as a lot of the same values that we have that I love about where I work. Just valuing developers, valuing skills, feeling like small teams that work closely with the client can really serve them well and serve their needs well. And just like a million other ways that just seem extremely healthy. So if anybody is looking, and I just glanced at your page about some open positions in different cities. Do y'all do remote work at all, or is it mostly on location in those various cities?
I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say around the remote work part, because we're experimenting with a few things. But I mean, we're really flexible policy. Like today, I'm working from home. In US, I'm pretty sure we have like remote as a first-class citizen in terms of work. for Europe, we're still in the exploration phase. But yeah, thanks for the shout out. I really love being there. I've joined the company in January, and it enabled me to do so many things. Like before joining, I never spoke to a meetup or a conference. And by end of the year, I'm going to have like under my belt, like 5 meetups and 2 conferences. So it's really, when you have a company that empowers you, it's great. And I think that the way we're approaching open source, to be honest, is also one of the few ways I can see companies actually work in open source. We recently announced a new project that is called, we propose some projects internally, then there's a committee, and this committee selects the best project, and that person is enabled to work on that project, which is an open source project, full-time for something like 6 weeks. Like, so no client work, you can just focus on that full-time. And it's great to see that we are finding ways to do open source sustainably, so that then, we can tell people, hey, you know what, we did it for us, maybe works for you. And I think in particular, the source program, which was also like something that another company called Futurist has been doing, is something that really inspired a lot of people. So I'm super happy to see this culture kind of propagating outside even Formidable.
Folks that are listening to a podcast like this are probably folks that want to grow in their skills, kind of get passionate about coding and things like that. And for folks like that, I kind of summarize what we're saying to pass a bit of advice along that a coworker of mine that I used to work with said. He said, when it comes to picking a place to work, optimize for learning. And I just thought it was so great, because I spent the first 10 years of my career working at companies that were fine, but we were just kind of writing code, and there was not a lot of need or desire to learn new things. And so if you're wired to learn new things and really want to grow in your career, pick a place that's focused on that, a place like Formidable or many other places. I think the benefits that I've seen in the last few years working somewhere like that have been huge. Yeah,
I just want to pile on that. It's funny because I wrote this book on how to find a job. It's mostly aimed at newer developers, and I tell people, look, figure out what you want and then prioritize for it. And so I tell them to pick 3. And what's funny is newer people, for the first couple of jobs, they tend to prioritize salary, and that's fine. It makes sense, right? You're trying to grow your career, and it's a way to keep score and figure out, you're doing well. But it's funny because once you get to the more advanced folks, so people have been in their career for a year or 2, they start optimizing for, well, I want a place that has a culture that lines up with what I, with the way I see the world, or I want a place that is going to make a difference, or I want a place where I'm going to work with certain kind of people, or I want a place where, I can do learning. And so it's interesting that way, where once we get to a certain point in our careers, our priorities change to something like that. And then you start optimizing for that and figuring out, okay, does this company have what I want? And, when it's salary and things, a lot of times you can go get that information on the internet, on Glassdoor or whatever. You can get an idea of what that is. It's a lot harder to optimize for the learning and things. You actually have to go talk to people who work there and, figure out what's going on there. But, one tip I'll throw out for that is, if you have a way of meeting up with some of their employees, that's probably the best way to go. And you can typically look and see if somebody's in your area on LinkedIn. You can just do a locality search, somebody within so much distance of me that works at this company. And then you can just reach out to them on LinkedIn. The other way to do it is to go to the conferences and see if it's like the conference for the thing, like Chain React is for React Native here in the US. I think there's a React Native EU in Europe. So you go to that conference and you see which companies have a handful of people there, because that's also a good sign. Oh, they paid for all these people to come to this. And that means that they optimize for learning. And so then you go and talk to them, find out what they're about, and see if they're hiring, and see the other thing you do while you're sitting there is not just to, figure out, oh, they're the right company for me, but also then talk to them and figure out what makes you the right person for them. And then you can go and you can kind of optimize what you're learning and what you're after to what they're looking for. And so then when you go apply in a month, or even apply right after the conference, you can say, well, I talked to some of your engineers. It turns out you use these handful of libraries. I'd never used 3 of them, but I've been learning them over the last few weeks. I find that very impressive. And a lot of companies do too. It's like, oh, this person's going to take initiative and it's going to pay off for us. And so just by doing some of that work, it gets really a lot easier to make the personal connections that are going to get you in the door. So yeah, just throwing a little bit extra out there to help folks get there if they want to work for a Big Nerd Ranch or a Formidable Labs or CallStack.io or Infinite Red or some of the other consultancies and companies that we've had on here that do React Native.
When I'm building a new product, G2I is the company that I call on to help me find a developer who can build the first version. G2I is a hiring platform run by engineers that matches you with React, React Native, GraphQL, and mobile engineers who you can trust. Whether you are a new company building your first product or an established company that wants additional engineering help, G2I has the talent you need to accomplish your goals. Go to devchat.tv/G2I to learn more about what G2I has to offer. In my experience, G2I has linked up with experienced developers that can fit my budget, and the G2I staff are friendly and easy to work with. They know how product development works and can help you find the perfect engineer for your stack. Go to devchat.tv/G2I to learn more about G2I.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. And to be honest, sort of going back to RAC Native Community, I find that that's also like a really great way to, get to meet other people that share your passion for RAC Native that work for different companies. Like some of the people I had a chance to speak with, it's incredible. Like even a year ago, I would have never imagined to be able to talk with someone, from Sony or from even like companies like GoDaddy, like the guys from Discord are on our Discord server. Like there's a lot of different companies that are, actually investing in RAC Native. And it's something that probably doesn't surface a lot because, sometimes not the bigger the companies, the more the harder it gets to, have an open source presence and also, announce the involvement in open source. But there are a lot of different companies and a lot of different people from, all the major companies inside the Discord. And it's crazy to me. Sometimes it's like, it's refreshing and it's inspiring to see that we're all like sharing this experience. And also like from the learning perspective, the RAC Native community, I think it's one of the best ways to start a journey in open source. Like if you've never done open source before, I really feel that the RAC Native community is a really great place to start because you have people that really want to help you get started. Because like if you post an issue in any of the repositories and you're like, I use this repo for work, I want to help you out, they will 100% like reply to you and be like, here's how you can do it. Here's how you can help me out. And after a while, you'll probably be in the server talking with all of us. And yeah, it's also like a lot easier than like submitting a PR against the main React Native repo because there's a lot more complexity involved in the structure of that process. Like since the PR needs to get imported inside Facebook and then redeployed in master, it's a bit more complicated than and since it's also a big code base, it can scare some people off. So like if you've never done open source, to be honest, and you're in React Native, I would really recommend you like thinking, hey, what's the library I use the most from the community? And let me ask the maintainer if I can help in any way.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, just from again, going back to the job standpoint, it's a great way to meet people if open source contributions is your stick, right? It's not the learning or the, whatever. Going to conferences, things like that. Yeah, same deal, right? You go in there, you find the people who are being encouraged by the company they work for to get involved. You know that they're going to be helping you out with doing the open source contributions. And so if that's what gets you going at the beginning of the day, then do it. And I love that sense of community too, right? It's like we're all pulling together and we're all working for the same thing. And you're not doing it alone. And a lot of times that's what leads to that burnout that we were talking about earlier. And so I love that idea of just having that community there. And Discord is very real time, kind of like Slack or some of the other options you have out there. And so just being able to get in and talk to people who kind of think about things the same way you do, that can really help you not feel like you're out there on an island, trying to hold the whole world up.
As developers, we have a temptation to think of everything as logic and like, oh, there's a problem, I need a logical answer. And, part of the point of these emphasis on mental health in the open source world is the fact that like we're human beings and we have emotions and capacities and we're limited. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about logic. And so, I haven't, struggle with these things as much as some folks. So I certainly don't want to, many people have fought harder and learned more than I have. But even in my limited experience with these things, just like recognizing like it's not just about finding an objective answer to some problem I have. Like, let me focus on connecting to people. Let me focus on some talking. It's not just the answers you get that you're going to help from, like the talking, the hearing, the support, the emotional side, the interpersonal side makes a real difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to pile on that a little bit too. I mean, for some people, I talked to Anatoly, I forget his name, but we did a JavaScript Jabber episode and just talked about mental health with him. He has pretty severe bipolar. And so, there are just some times where he just has to take a month off because he just can't. And, so his employer helps him deal with that. And, the open source community that is around what he does is pretty understanding. And so sometimes it's just something like that, where it's just inherent in somebody's makeup. And then, and he loves what he does. So there's no, it's something that's beyond his control. And sometimes it's just life, life comes in and kicks you in the teeth. I mean, last year in June, I reached out to all of the hosts of all of the shows on devchat.tv. And I basically said, I'll be around if something lights on fire, but I'm not going to show up to any podcast because my dad had passed away a couple months earlier and I just couldn't deal, right? I love doing the podcast. I love talking to people. I love being a part of this, but sometimes you have to take a break. And the other thing is that a lot of times we pull in the logic and we justify things away because we want something so bad. And then it turns out that wasn't necessarily a healthy decision. And so a lot of times the logic backs up what we emotionally want instead of leading us to the thing that makes the most sense. And so we have to be aware that sometimes we're using logic to justify an emotional bias. And we have to see our way around that too, so that we can keep doing what we're doing. And so, all of that to say, essentially, be aware and, use the community to get the support that you need and do whatever it takes to take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, all of these projects are essentially made up of people and code, but people. And we have to be able to, support the people. And sometimes things are just not going to work out the way that we think that they should.
Yeah, 100%. I fully agree with what you just said. And to be honest, like, maybe I'm a bit drastic, but like sometimes to convince myself that I can take a break, I think of myself, will someone actually die if I don't do this? And of course, the answer is always no. I mean, at the end of the day, RAC Native is not, as far as I know, supporting any kind of like medical device, or it is not sending people to space. So the risk of something bad happening because, the release has been delayed of a week is nil. It's like literally just all mental constructs. But when you try to be real, it's not really that important in a way. And it sounds super weird said by me, but it's not like, at the end of the day, you should always try to remember that you come first, that you're worth, and that, coding doesn't really matter. We're doing it, but it doesn't really matter. The important things are other things. And you should never feel afraid to say to someone, hey, you know what, I'm having a good day, a good week, or a good year, to be honest.
Yeah. One thing that I've learned about that, I've been doing this challenge called 75 Hard. And essentially so one of the things is you have to do a social media post every day. And, he encourages you to include a photo. And I've been doing it with a video, and I've been posting it to Instagram. And I should just list my Instagram here. But anyway, I'll make sure it winds up in the show notes. But anyway, so I post a post, and I'm essentially, you have to work out every day. You have to drink water every day, a gallon of water every day. You have to work out twice for 45 minutes. One of them has to be outside. You have to read 10 pages out of a book. You have to do the social media post, and you have to stick to a diet. And what's funny is like the first couple weeks that I was doing it, the videos are all me smiling and I'm all gung ho. At this point, I'm 5 weeks in, right? And so like the post I put up yesterday was, oh man, today, right? Today was one of those days. And it's interesting because when something's new, you get excited, you want to work on it, blah, blah, blah. And then, eventually you're going to hit a wall somewhere, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And, that's totally fine. And a lot of times people don't show that. Now I've had to, because I have to post every day. And so, some of them are like, this is a slog and I did it anyway. But yeah, so, just be aware. Everybody hits those. You're not seeing it because they're not posting it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. But just take a human minute, and realize that, everybody gets there. All right. Well, should we do some picks?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Josh, do you want to start us off with picks?
Sure. I wasn't going to do this one, but it just came to mind related to the topics about work and life sustainability. A book called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work by David Hannemeyer Hansen. I think Jason Fried from Basecamp as well as a co-author on it. Creator of Rails, very well known for very extreme positions on just about every topic. That have changed some over the years, but this is one that I could definitely get behind. Many of the points in there. I wouldn't agree with every single point, but it talks about how to make a sustainable work environment. And so if you're the leader of a company, like, you could change your work environment to match up with that. If you're an employee, maybe you can influence certain things, or you can set personal boundaries, or look for, as you're looking for what you're looking for out of a workplace. Points in there could be helpful. I think the title kind of speaks for itself. So if you feel like your workplace is crazy, that book has a bunch of ideas for how it might be able to be less crazy. The other one is something that Lorenzo asked and got a response to on Twitter recently that super helped me out, because I've just started on my first React Native for Android project a few weeks ago. And he had gotten insight from the community about how to more easily run an Android emulator from the command line, rather than having to open up Android Studio and click all the buttons and pull it up. So that was just super helpful. It saves me time every day. So I'll include the link to that Twitter conversation that goes out to Stack Overflow and stuff. But yeah, nice little helpful tip for making using the Android emulator. Maybe that's one of the reasons that sometimes Android gets deprioritized. It's just that one extra step of not being able to automatically launch the emulator from the command line. Those little things make a difference. So those are my picks.
Nice. I'm going to jump in with a few picks too. So lately I've been working on my car. It's funny. I had to replace the water pump, which wasn't fun. It took me 2 days. And then it worked for about 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden there's coolant spraying out of the radiator, which is not a good thing. So I get to fix that today. Today's Labor Day in the US. So AutoZone is where I go to get my auto parts. And if I can't get them there, then RockAuto.com will get them to me in a few days. And they're solid. So I'm going to pick those two. RockAuto.com is just an online parts store. And if they tell me over at the auto parts store that they don't have the part and they're going to have to order it in, I just order it from Rock Auto because I get a better deal and it'll show up in about the same time frame on my porch. So I'm really, really a fan of them. You mentioned DHH, and we actually interviewed him on Ruby Rogues a couple weeks ago. And so the episode should come out, I think, about the same time this one does. So go check out Ruby Rogues and go see that episode there. We talk a bit about Rails, but we also talk a bit about his philosophy on coding and running a company and things like that. We've done a few interviews with him on Ruby Rogues, so definitely worth going back and checking that stuff out. So I'm going to pick that as well. And then finally, I'm about done with a book called Superfans by Pat Flynn. Pat has a podcast called, what is it? SPI? It's something passive income. And I can't, my brain is totally, anyway, smart passive income. That's what it is. And he's been podcasting for a long, long time about, starting and running an internet business. And anyway, I really love his stuff. I've met him a few times. My book actually has a dedication scrawled into the front of it because I cornered him at Podcast Movement and made him scribble in my book. And I went to the launch party for the book at Podcast Movement, which is where I got the book. But yeah, really enjoying it. Definitely some things in it that I'm going to be implementing for the dev chat community. So keep an eye out for some of that. A lot of it's going to come through the email list. So you can go join the email list, devchat.tv. Just fill in your email in any of the forms on there, and that'll get you on the list. I'm also putting together an email course on how to stay current because I get asked that all the time. And so I think the email, the more I write for this email course, though, the more I'm thinking that I might expand it into a number of blog posts, which may actually turn into another book. We'll just have to see on that. But yeah, for the most part, you can go get it there. I've got about a dozen emails in there that are just going to walk you through the different stages of figuring out what to learn and then learning it. So Anyway, that's just kind of what I've got that I'm working on. But Superfans is the book that's inspiring me as far as how I interact with listeners. And I guess I should put one more in there. If you're a listener to the show and you want to chat with me for 15 minutes, you can do that. Just go to devchat.tv/15minutes. That's 15 minutes. And it'll take you to a place where you can schedule 15 minutes on my calendar. And we'll jump on Zoom and we'll talk. And I love talking to people. So I'm excited to have that opportunity. So yeah, if you think, oh, that's cool, I'd love to talk to Chuck, you're actually doing me a favor by clicking that link and scheduling something. So yeah, make us both happy and take advantage of that. Lorenzo, what are your picks?
I have 2 picks for today. And the first one is actually like one of the projects that came from the RAC Native community I'm most proud of, which is the Upgrade Helper. It's basically a web tool that is trying to solve one of the biggest issues in React Native community experience, which is the pain of upgrading. And basically this web app is providing you with a series of steps, providing you with a full depth of all the changes that you need to do when you upgrade between versions. And it's a great app. I'm so happy about it. And I really want to give a shout out to Lucas and Pablo for taking care of it, because it's mostly them and it's great. And as my second pick, I want to sort of quote unquote shameless plug my next meetup. Is actually the first meetup I've ever organized, and it's called Provided As Is. And it's going to be a meetup only for people in London, sorry. But it's basically group therapy for open source maintainers. It's something that we've been discussing a lot internally at Formidable, and they were super helpful. So we're going to start in October. And yeah, look forward to that if you're around. I would love to get more people involved.
All right. And if people want to find you online, reach out to you, where do they go?
Usually they can reach me out on Twitter. I'm @Kelset. It's my nickname for both Twitter and GitHub and like every other website where I want to be found. So like DevTube, Medium, etc. My DMs are open on Twitter. So if you have any questions around React Native or you want to talk open source, yeah, you can reach out there.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll go ahead and wrap this one up, folks, and have another one for you next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content